Board attention, all rise. Superior Court number 11, State of Georgia. The Honorable Judge Parker Heath presiding.
The people of the State of Georgia versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor. The clerk will now draw a jury.
You are the panel from which the jury will be selected to try this case. 6 will be drawn. As I draw your names, please answer present and step up here. Take your seats in the jury box. Jason Witherspoon. Julie Caponegro. Present. Lori Hayes. Gerald Meek. Heather Shutt. Summer Brigham. Jurors, please rise. You will be the foreman. Place your left hand on the Bible. Jurors, raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear to well and fairly try this case, to render a true verdict, so help you God? Say, I do.
I do.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are the jurors who will try this case. At its close, you will retire to the jury room and vote upon your verdict. I instruct you to listen to the testimony carefully and pronounce your judgment to the best knowledge of your hearts and minds. You are to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the murder of your daughter, and her fate rests in your case. The district attorney may now proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the night of January 16th, near midnight, the body of a man came hurtling through space and crashed, a disfigured mass, at the foot of the Faulkner building. He was thrown, or leaped, from the roof of his luxurious penthouse. The defense will claim that it was suicide, that this great man was unwilling to bend before his creditors and acknowledge his ruin, that he found the fall from the tallest building in the world shorter and easier than the descent from the throne of the world's financial dictator. A few months ago, behind every big financial transaction stood that well-known figure with kingdoms and nations in one hand and a whip in the other. Then why should he commit suicide? No one suspected that the gigantic swindle lay at the foundation of Faulkner Enterprises. No one knew that the entire business world was in danger of a massive heart attack. Thousands of investors were stricken with paralysis the day that monstrous heart stopped beating. Now, 2 women ruled his life and his death. One of them you see before you, Miss Karen Andre, Faulkner's efficient secretary and fellow notorious swindler. But ladies and gentlemen, there was another, one whom fate had sinews for salvation. This lovely girl, Nancy Lee Faulkner, only daughter to our great philanthropist, John Graham Whitfield. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Bjorn Faulkner had reformed for his crime. He wanted to start all over. The best proof of that is that 2 weeks following his marriage, he dismissed his secretary, Miss Karen Andre. But ladies and gentlemen, one is not easily through with a woman such as Karen Andre. We can only imagine what hatred and revenge smoldered in her heart. No, Bjorn Faulkner did not kill himself. He was murdered. The state contends he was murdered by the woman you see before you, Karen Andre. Our first witness will be Dr. Kirkland.
Dr. Kirkland.
What is your name?
Dr. Louise Kirkland.
And what is your occupation?
I am the medical examiner of this county.
In the course of your duty, doctor, what were you called upon to do on the night of January 16th?
I was called to examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner.
You found a body greatly mangled by a fall.
Yes.
Was that all?
No, a closer examination revealed a bullet wound between the 4th and 5th interspace in the region of the heart.
And what did you establish as the cause of the death?
It was impossible to determine. It could have been the wound or the fall.
In your opinion, doctor, could a .32 caliber bullet have caused that wound?
Yes, it could.
Now, how long had Faulkner been dead when you arrived at the scene?
I reached the body about half an hour after the fall.
Judging by the condition of the body, could you tell us exactly how long he had been dead?
No, owing to the cold weather, the blood had coagulated immediately, which makes a difference of several hours impossible to detect.
He therefore could have been dead longer than half an hour.
It is possible.
He therefore could have been dead before he was thrown off the penthouse.
Yes.
That is all.
You said that Faulkner could have been shot and died before he fell from the penthouse, Dr. Kirkland. But can you state positively that he died as a result of that wound?
No, owing to the condition of the body, it was impossible to determine.
So Faulkner could have been conscious and able to move after he was wounded.
Yes, it is possible.
In other words, Faulkner could have shot himself and then left from the building.
He could, yes, but I
I think that is all.
Mrs. John Hutchins.
Mrs. John Hutchins. You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, sir, my judge.
What is your name?
Miss John Joseph Hutchins.
And what is your occupation?
I ain't got no occupation. I was just the wife of my husband.
And what does your husband do?
He's a night janitor in the Faulkner building, sir.
And does Mr. Faulkner own business offices in that building?
Yes, sir.
Does he own the penthouse on the roof of that building?
Yes, sir.
And who lived there?
Mr. Faulkner did. That is, before his marriage.
And after his marriage?
After his marriage, Miss Andre lived there, all by herself.
partner calling on Miss Andre after his marriage?
Oh, yes, sir, one time.
And when was that?
On the night of January 16th.
Kindly tell us about it, Miss Hutchins.
Well, it was about 10:30.
Wait a minute, how did you know the time?
Well, my husband always goes to work every night at 10 o'clock. But that night I worked for him.
Why didn't your husband work that night?
No, for the last year or two now, my husband don't seem to have no more gumption. And when he don't, I take his place.
So on the night of January 16th, your husband was low on gumption.
Yes. and it was about 30 minutes after I goes to work that the doorbell rang. And so I went there and opened the door. And it was Miss Andre. And Mr. Faulkner was with her. I was surprised because Miss Andre has her own key. And most times she opens the door herself.
Was she alone with Mr. Faulkner?
Oh no, sir. There was two other gentlemen with them.
And who were they?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know?
No, sir.
Had you ever seen them before?
No, sir, never.
What did they look like?
They was tall and sort of slender, both of them. One of them had his hat all crooked over his eyes, and his coat collar turned up. He'd been drinking.
What makes you think that?
Mr. Faulkner and the other gentleman had to help him into the elevator. His feet was so loose.
Did Mr. Faulkner look worried?
Oh, no, sir. He seemed half happy.
Did he look like a man contemplating self-destruction?
Which?
I mean, did he look as if he would kill himself?
Oh, no, sir. Listen, he died laughing.
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Now what I gonna do?
Nothing at all, Miss Hutchins. Just answer the questions. Now, did the others in the party seem happy too?
Yes, sir. They was all laughing when they went up in the elevator. Except the drunk one.
Did you see anyone leave that night?
Yes, sir. The first one, he come down about 15 minutes later.
And who was that?
The drunk one. He come down in the elevator all by himself. He wasn't quite so drunk no more. He could walk, but he still staggered a little. I wanted to help him to the door, seeing the condition he was in, but he noticed me coming and he hurried out.
Did you see where he went?
Yes, sir. He got to a great coupe parked right at the entrance and drove away fast. But the cops must have got him.
What makes you think that?
Well, I noticed this car that started right out.
What car?
The defendant will please keep quiet.
If Miss Andre will let me do the questioning, I might satisfy her curiosity. I was just about to ask, what car, Miss Hutchins?
Oh, it was a big black one. A sedan, I reckon. It was parked 2 cars from the first one.
How many were in the car?
I saw just one man.
Now, what makes you think he was after the first car?
Well, I couldn't be sure he was, sir. It just looked funny they stopped together like that and all.
Did you see the other stranger leave that night?
Yes, sir. He come down about 10 minutes later.
And what did he do?
Nothing much. He seemed to be in a hurry, so he went right out.
And that left Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre in the penthouse alone.
Yes, sir.
And then what did you do?
Well, I goes on about my work. And it must have been about an hour later. And I heard the screams outside in the street. Then Miss Andre come running out the private entrance. Her gown all torn, sobbing wild like. So I ran after her, and we pushed to the street outside, and there was Mr. Faulkner lying on the street all mashed to pieces.
And what did Miss Andre do?
She just screamed and fell on her knees.
That is all, Miss Hutchins.
No, sir, that ain't all. There's more.
More? More what?
Well, just then, some other people come running up and try to tell the policeman something.
What did they say?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know?
No, sir.
What else?
Well, I don't know.
Okay, then And you really don't know more than do you, Miss Hutchins?
No, sir. Now I come to think of it, I recognize all.
Thank you. That is all, Miss Hutchins.
Just a moment. You said that you had never seen Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his wedding, with the exception of that night. Now tell me, Miss Hutchins, do you really see everyone who enters the building at night?
Oh, no, ma'am. If the guest has no key to the penthouse entrance, he could come in and I wouldn't even know it.
So in other words, Mr. Faulkner could have been calling on Miss Andre any number of times and you would not have been aware of it.
Oh, no, ma'am, because I don't spy on people. Whatever they does, I leave it at that.
That is all.
You may leave the chair now.
Oh, yes, sir.
Anna Van Fleet.
Hannah Van Fleet. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth?
I
Your name
do. Anna Von Fleet.
and your occupation.
Private investigator.
What was your last assignment?
Shadowing Mr. Bjorn Faulkner.
And by whom were you employed to do that?
By Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
Were you were you shadowing Mr. Faulkner on the night of January 16th?
I was.
Kindly tell us about it.
I start at 6:13 p.m. Mr. Faulkner leaves home at Buckhead, wears formal dress suit, drives the road through himself alone, unusual speed all the way to Atlanta.
And where do they go?
Drives up to the Faulkner building and goes in. I wait outside in my car. 9:35 p.m. Mr. Faulkner comes out with Miss Andre. Miss Andre is wearing corsage orchids of unusual proportions. They drive away.
And then what did you do?
No one is perfect in this world.
What do you mean?
I lost track of
You
them.
what?
Due to Mr. Faulkner's speed and an accident.
What accident?
My left fender crashing into a truck. Damage to which fender charged to Mrs. Faulkner.
What did you do when you lost track of them?
Returned to the Faulkner building and waited.
And when did they return?
10:30 p.m. exactly. A gray coupe follows them. Mr. Faulkner opens the door and helps Miss Andre. While she rings the bell, Faulkner opens the door of the gray coupe, and a handsome gentleman wearing formal clothes steps out. Together they help out a third gentleman, the latter wearing a gray overcoat. This gentleman shows signs of inebriation.
And then what did you do?
Left my car and went into Gary's room. Well, I must explain that I always allow myself time to take nourishment every 4 hours while on duty. Then, I sat at a window and watched the door of the Faulkner building.
What did you observe?
Nothing for 15 minutes. Then, the man in the gray overcoat, the tipsy one, comes out and starts the car. The gray coupe, obviously in a hurry, drives away south.
Did you see the other stranger leave that night?
The handsome guy? Yes. 10 minutes later, he gets into a car which stands there at the curb and drives away south.
Had you ever seen these two men with Faulkner before?
No, first time I ever saw them.
And then what did you do?
I wait. Mr. Faulkner is now alone in the penthouse with Miss Andre, and I'm curious. Professionally. So I go up to the nightclub on the roof of the Brooks building. There's an open gallery off the dining room. You go out and you can see the Faulkner penthouse, clear as day. I go out.
And then what?
I look.
Then what?
I yell.
What did you see?
No lights. Karen Andre's white gown shimmering with the moonlight. A man in evening clothes, Faulkner, leaning against the parapet. She pushes him with all her strength. He goes over the parapet, down, into space.
And then what did you do?
I rush back into the dining room, yell about what I see. A crowd follows me down to the Faulkner building. We find the bloody mess on the pavement and Miss Andre sobbing over it, fit to kill.
You're a witness.
every action of Mr. Faulkner and report in detail.
Can Mr. Faulkner call on Miss Andre after his wedding?
I don't know. He went to the Faulkner building every day. He may have gone to his office, or Miss Andre may have come up to the penthouse. Or he may have gone up to the penthouse and seen her there. I don't know.
Did you tell that to Miss Faulkner?
I did.
Did she seem worried?
I don't believe so. Mr. Faulkner was the most devoted of husbands and loved his wife dearly.
Just how do you know that?
Well, those are Mrs. Faulkner's own words.
Now then, please. Can you tell us what time it was when you started up to the penthouse at Brooks Building on the night of January 16th?
11:32 p.m. exactly.
And how long the walk from the Faulkner Building to the Brooks Building?
3 minutes.
And at what time did you reach the balcony of the club?
11:57.
So, it took you exactly 25 minutes to reach the balcony of the club. What were you doing the rest of the time, Miss Nancy?
Well, they have dancing at the club and other things.
And did you partake of these other things?
Well, I had a couple of drinks, if I understand the drift of your curiosity. You can't say I was intoxicated.
Oh, I've said nothing of the sort, as yet. Now, you said that you saw Miss Andre pushing Mr. Faulkner off the penthouse, and it was some distance away, and it was at night, so it was dark, and you were drunk. Let's just say you had a couple of drinks.
The drinks had nothing to do with it.
Are you quite certain that Miss Andre was suspicious? Could she have been struggling with him?
Well, it's a funny way of struggling.
Miss Van Fleet, what were Mrs. Faulkner's instructions to you before you came here to testify?
Mrs. Faulkner has not been here to instruct me. As everyone knows, Mrs. Faulkner and her father disappeared shortly after Mr. Faulkner's death and have not been heard from
Have
since.
you heard from him since?
I have no record of it.
Miss Van Fleet, why don't you tell us how much an eyewitness to Mr. Faulkner's murder would be worth, Mrs. Faulkner?
Your Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
Exception. That's all.
Just a moment, Miss Stevens.
What kind of car do you drive, Miss Van Fleet?
A brown coupe, old and serviceable.
Did you notice any car following the man in the gray coat on the night of January 16th?
I do not recall. The traffic was quite heavy.
That's all.
Elvira Sweeney.
Elvira Sweeney. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, ma'am, I do.
Your name
Elvira Sweeney.
and your occupation.
Please, boy, been in the force about a year. During that time,
Yes, but were you at the scene of Mr. Faulkner's death?
Yes, sir, right there. And it hardly happened when I
Did you question Miss Andre?
Not right away. Before we do anything, that lady, man, please. She rushed up to me and yelled out, she was just off hearing all the right. Off the roof.
And how did Miss Andre react to that?
She started laughing. I thought she went crazy.
And then what?
I took her all up in the elevator to the penthouse.
Did you find anything unusual?
I say I did. When we stepped out of the elevator, I thought we were in the country. Right there on the roof was a lake with trees and grass, real trees. Big as brown as that. Just like the man.
What was the first thing you did?
I turned the shower on.
Why did you do that?
I heard when Mr. Faulkner lived there, he always bathed in wine. I want to see if it was true.
Was it true?
If it was, the service had been discontinued.
But did you find anything related to the case?
Oh, that. Yes, sir. I found the letter in the jar. I saw it the moment I went in.
And where was it?
Propped up on the steamer table. It was lying flat.
Mr. Flint? Mrs. Faulkner! Your Honor, this is a witness I've been trying to locate.
Very well.
brought me here right here. I wanted to do my duty towards the memory of my husband.
There's anything we can do to help you think my church folks. Mr. Whitfield, I can only express my deepest appreciation for you being here. If you'll kindly take a seat over here, I can be with you two in just a minute. That's a foolish question. No, please sit in this chair. I insist. It's over here.
Your Honor, I object. This is an attempt to influence the jury. A trick to make them face Faulkner's widow throughout the
Your
trial.
Honor, the defense counsel has no right to dictate what
Silence! I shall allow objections overruled.
Now, a moment ago, you said you found the letter.
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
Do you recognize this letter?
Yes, sir, the very same letter.
Please read it for the benefit of the jury.
If any future news story would like to record my last advice to humanity, I'll say that I found only two valuable things on this earth: my whip over the world and Karen on Drake. To those who can use it, the advice is worth what is called mankind. Beyond fault.
Submitted as evidence.
Accepted. Exhibit A.
Was that all you found, officer?
I should say not. On the roof garden I found a gun. It's about this
I will
long.
now show you a .32 caliber pistol. That's the gun you found.
The very same. So you got hold of that too, huh? Go.
And where did you find it?
Lying up under the chair, I picked it up with my handkerchief, because I'm always watching for fingerprints. Well, the barrel smells strong with powder. The shoulder is just too far.
And whose gun did Miss Andre say it was?
She said it was hers.
How did she explain the shot?
Well, she said that Mr. Faulkner had been unhappy. He had wrote the letter and placed it in the drawing room in order for her not to touch it. Then he opened a drawer and grabbed his gun. Well, she thought what he was going to do, struggle. And during the struggle, the gun went off and Mr. Faulkner was wounded in the chest.
Now, Miss Andre claims that the gun was in Faulkner's hand when it went off.
Yes, sir.
Was she positive about that?
Said it 3 times.
And was the gun examined for fingerprints?
Short head, boys. Your photograph.
And were the police able to identify them?
They're exactly like these, sir.
And whose are these?
Karen Andre.
And were the fingerprints of anyone other than Karen Andre's found on the gun?
Not a one, not a one.
Submitted as evidence.
Accepted. Exhibit C.
Now, after the gun went off in Faulkner's hand, what happened next, according to Miss Andre?
Well, she said that Faulkner dropped the gun and yelled out at her, and she couldn't stop it. And before she knew it, he had leaped off the roof.
Who did Miss Andre say was with them that night?
She said 2 men had, that they were friends with Mr. Faulkner, and that she had met him for the first time that evening while he was dinner with Mr. Faulkner.
Now, she claims that she had never seen these two gentlemen before.
Yes, sir.
Was she emphatic about that?
Yes, sir. Couldn't shake her.
That is all.
Miss Andre told you that she had struggled with Faulkner to prevent his suicide. Now, tell me, did you notice any indications of a struggle in her clothing?
Yes, ma'am. Her dress was torn. It had diamond straps, and one of them was broke. So that she had to hold it up with one hand. I was so embarrassed.
That is all.
Jane Chandler.
Jane Chandler. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Jane Chandler,
And what is your occupation?
handwriting expert to the Georgia Police Department.
Exhibit A. Do you recognize this letter?
Yes!
determine?
I was asked to determine whether it was written by Mr. Faulkner.
And what is your verdict?
Certain peculiarities in the handwriting led me to the conclusion that this letter was forged. Miss Chandler, it was brought to your attention in the Inquisition that Miss Honor was in the habit of signing Mr. Faulkner's signatures on unimportant documents while she was employed as a secretary. Now, have you compared these signatures with Faulkner's real ones? I have. And what is your opinion of them? I can compliment Miss Andre on her art. The difference is very slight. Bearing that in mind, isn't it impossible to tell the difference between Faulkner's real signatures and Miss Andre's imitations? It is a very difficult task, but we do have means of determining it. What are those means? Well, applying it into the microscope, which reveals certain vibrations and certain shadowings of the pen, according to the nerve condition of the writer, which cannot be imitated. Miss Chandler, how often are you handwriting experts wrong in your
Your Honor, we object.
Your Honor, this is a perfectly legitimate question. I wish to establish that this is not an exact
Your Honor,
science.
it's been accepted as an exact
Order! I'll sustain the objection.
Miss Chandler, taking into consideration the similarity of their handwriting, isn't there a reasonable doubt that this letter was forged? Of course there can be doubt, but it's the better all. Thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. Faulkner.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do. What is your name?
Nancy D. Faulkner.
And what was your relation to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his wife.
When did you first meet Bjorn?
In August of last year,
And where did you first meet him?
at a ball given by a friend of mine in Denver.
Mrs. Faulkner, you have heard about Mr. Faulkner's reputation as being the most ruthless of men. Did you find him so on your first meeting?
No, not at all. He was perfectly charming and considerate that first night I met him. You see, it wasn't until later that he told me I was the first one he'd ever met and needed respect.
And when did you see him again?
About 3 weeks later, I invited him to dine at my home. Just an informal dinner. Father's Day.
Did you see him often after that?
Yes, his visits became more and more frequent until the day
Until the day.
he proposed to me.
Please continue.
We went driving on a lonely little road, Mr. Faulkner and I, alone. Then, Mr. Faulkner seized my hand and said, "Nancy, I love you."
I'm sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. If you wish to continue.
Why, Your Honor, this is a subterfuge staged to gain the sympathy of the jury. I demand a fair trial for my client. I demand an order. The jury will ignore these remarks.
Mrs. Faulkner, I'm sorry for this interruption. Please continue.
Then, Mr. Faulkner told me the truth about his fortune, that it was gone. He said he did not ask me to marry him because he had nothing to offer me. But I loved him. I told him his money meant nothing to me.
Did he feel hopeless about the future?
No, not at all. I told him it was our duty to save his enterprises, our duty to those women and children who had entrusted their savings in him. He said my faith in him was like a great driving force propelling him onward. How could he think of suicide?
Did Did you remain in Georgia after the wedding?
Yes, we made our residence in my budget home. Mr. Faulkner sold his Atlanta penthouse.
Did he mention anything concerning Miss Andre?
He did not tell me. I did not ask. I never interfered in my husband's business.
And what did you answer to what he said concerning Miss Andre?
Well, I told him that we should keep her on for a little while, and that maybe perhaps he could find another position for her in business. He said he'd provide for her financially, but he never wanted to see her again.
Mrs. Faulkner, what did Mr. Faulkner do on the day of January 16th?
He spent it in town on business as usual. He said he had to dine with 3 friends for dinner, so he did not eat at home. He left about 6 o'clock.
Did he mention who the 3 friends were?
He did not tell me, and I did not ask him. I make it a point never to interfere in my husband's business.
Did you notice anything peculiar in the way he said goodbye to you that night?
No, not a thing. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd try to be home early. I followed him to the door and watched him drive away, thinking what a perfect dream our love had been. A beautiful, uplifting relationship based on mutual trust. How could I know that this love for jealousy would bring about his dinner?
Your Honor, we object. Move that be stricken out.
The witness's last remark may go out.
That is all, Mrs. Faulkner.
Do you think you'll be able to answer a few questions now, Mrs. Faulkner?
As many as you wish, Miss Stevens.
You said your romance was like a perfect dream, didn't you?
Yes,
A sacred trust regenerate your soul. A beautiful, uplifting relationship based on mutual trust.
yes.
Then why did you hire a detective to spy on your husband?
Well, I didn't hire a detective to spy on my husband. I hired him to protect my husband.
Protect him? Oh, why don't you explain that to us, Miss Faulkner?
Well, you see, my husband had been threatened by a gangster, Larry Reagan. My husband paid no attention to it, but I was worried. So I hired Miss Van Fleet to watch my husband. I did it secretly because I knew Mr. Faulkner would object.
How was a detective following your husband from a distance supposed to protect him?
Well, I didn't think the underworld would attack a man being constantly watched.
So all Miss Van Fleet had to do was watch Mr. Faulkner?
Yes.
Mr. Faulkner alone?
Yes.
Not Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre?
Miss Stevens, I find that supposition insulting to me.
Well, I haven't noticed you sparing any insults.
I can assure you I intended nothing of the kind.
Now, Mr. Faulkner told you he never wanted to see Miss Andre again.
Yes.
And yet, after you were married, he gave her his pick, the most luxurious apartment in Atlanta. Your detective told you that, didn't she?
Yes, I knew it.
How do you explain it?
I cannot explain it. How can I know what kind of blackmail she was holding in her head?
And how do you explain the fact that on the night of January 16th, your husband lied to you? And instead of dining with 3 friends, he went directly to Miss Andre's house.
If I could explain that, maybe I could save you the bother of this trial. We would have my husband's murderer. All I know is she made him come to her house for some reason which he did not tell me. And that later that night he was found dead.
That's all.
Your Honor, may I
Here your court, number 11, state of Georgia. The Honorable Judge Arthur Heath presiding.
People upstairs, Georgia versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor?
Attorney may now proceed.
Magda Svensson.
Magda Vincent. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I swear.
What is your name?
You not, you just call me.
Kindly answer my questions without argument. State your name.
Magda Svensson.
And what country did you come from?
A Swede never come from any country but Sweden.
What is your occupation?
I'm an housekeeper
And by whom were you employed to do this?
by Herr John Faulkner, and before that by his father.
How long have you been with the family?
I've been in family for 38 years. I remember Herr John since he was a little kid.
When did you come to America?
I've been here 5 years.
What were the duties assigned to you by Mr. Faulkner?
I keep handcuffs for him. I stay even after he goes. When he gets married and gives birth to her. But I'm never employed by this one.
Now, Mrs. Smith.
Miss Svensson,
Pardon me, Miss Smith.
that's all right.
Now, Miss Smith, what can you tell us concerning the relations between Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre after his marriage?
Oh, decent woman like me should know about such things. But sin is shameless in this world.
Tell us about it, Miss Svensson.
Well, from very first day, she tried to get her claws on her partner. It's not a good thing when secretary forgets those secretary.
Do you mean she was in love with Faulkner?
Only the heart can love, but she had no heart. She wants to know too much about his business.
Was Faulkner in love with her?
He married to other woman. Good man can never love double.
Then why did he insist on keeping her?
Then, before he knew it, she knows too much about his business and he cannot let her go. She knew that she had her claws on her partner and she made him spend much money on her. You try to count up all the money he wastes on that woman.
Can you give us any examples of this extravagance?
I can so. He had platinum dress made for her. Yes, I said platinum. Fine mesh, as soft as silk. And she wore it on her naked body. She had a fire in the fireplace and heated the dress. And she asked me to put it on her, as hot as she could stand it. And if it burned her shameless skin, she laughed like babe she is, and said was man kissing about like tiger. Your Honor, we object.
Your Honor, there's a final question pertaining
Oh, but Your Honor,
case.
this is turning
Silence! I shall ask the witness to word her testimony more modestly.
See is seen, Judge, anything you call it.
Now, Miss Vincent, how did Mr. Faulkner act at the time of his marriage to Miss Whitfield?
Oh, he was happy for the first time in his life. He was happy like this was the man that found right road.
Did you know of anything that made him worry in those days that could bring him to suicide eventually?
No, nothing.
Now tell us, Miss Vincent, how did Miss Andre react toward the other woman?
She sounded like stone spits. But I hear her crying the night of marriage. Crying, sobbing. And that's the first only time in her life.
Why was she crying?
I not know. All women cry sometimes. Just to cry.
Was she crying because she had lost Wagner.
Not her. If she loses one man, she finds another. I seen her kissing another man same night of wedding.
What man?
I not know him. I seen him first time I wedding.
Kindly tell us about it, Miss
Well, I went to wedding. Oh, it was beautiful. My poor Gerald, so handsome. And young bride, all white and lovely as lily. And I cried like looking at my own children. But she not go to wedding.
She stay at home?
She stay home. I come back to wedding early. I come to 7 o'clock, but she not hear me. She was home all right, but she was not alone.
Who was with her?
He was the man out on the roof in the garden. I see them. He held her in his arms. Kissed her. A sinner. Oh. Well, she stepped aside to say something, but I might hear she speak very soft. He not say a word. He ought to take her hand and hold it. He held it for so long, I get tired of waiting, so I go back to my room.
Did you see the man leave that night?
No, I did not.
Did you see him again?
Yes, once.
And when was that?
The night of January 16th.
Tell us about it, Miss Vincent.
Well, she very strange that day. She phoned me and said I had rest of day off. So I done suspicious.
Why did that make you suspicious?
Well, it was Wednesday and my day off is Thursday. And I not ask her second day off. And I tell her I not need day off. And she said she not need me. So I go.
What time did you go?
About 4 o'clock. But I want to know secret. So I come back.
When did you come back?
About 10 at night. The house dark and she not home, so I wait. Half hour after I hear them home. I see her with her partner, so I afraid to stay. But before I go, I see 2 gentlemen with them. One gentleman, oh, he drunk.
Who was that?
I not know him.
Did you know the other stranger?
Yes, he was same man I seen kiss with Andre and Betty night.
That is all, Miss Vincent.
Just a minute, Miss Vincent. You still have to have a little talk with me.
Oh, but I tell you all in all.
Oh, you may be able to answer a few more questions. For instance, you said that you had seen a stranger making love to Miss Andre.
I did so.
But you also said that you could not hear what was said. Now remember, you were on the road. If you could not hear what was said, you can't really swear that he did make love to her, can you?
No, but I can't swear that you didn't either.
Can you really swear that you saw him kiss her?
With my own 2 eyes, I saw the sinner do it.
Well, after all, what's so sinful about a boy kissing a girl?
Oh, listen, Missy. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're too young to be experienced. But I know that kiss is last door to heaven before a girl falls into hell.
Let's just confine ourselves to this case. Now you said it was dark the first time you saw the gentleman?
Yes, it was
And
dark.
on the night of January 16th, when you were so ingeniously spying on your mistress, you saw her come in with Mr. Faulkner, and then you hurried to depart in order not to be caught, am I correct?
You have good memory.
So you only had a swift glance at the 2 gentlemen.
Yes.
Can you tell us what the drunken gentleman was like?
How can I? No time to notice face, and it was too dark at door.
So, it was too dark to identify the drunken gentleman, and yet you were able to tell us what the other man looked like, whom you had seen only once before.
Listen, Missy. I am under oath, as you say, and I am religious woman and respect oath. Now I say for say man, and I say it again. What do you think? I know nothing about a man. Oh,
That is all.
Mr. John Graham Whitfield. is your occupation, or rather your business?
I am president of the Whitfield National Bank.
Mr. Whitfield, what relation were you to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his father-in-law.
It is obvious, Mr. Whitfield, that you are well qualified to pass judgment on financial matters. Could you kindly tell us the state of Mr. Faulkner's business immediately preceding his death?
I should say it was desperate, but not hopeless. Our bank made a loan of $25 million in an effort to save his enterprise. Needless to say, that money is lost.
What prompted you to make that loan?
He was the husband of my only daughter. Their happiness is those who are paramount to me. But my motives were not entirely personal. Realizing the countless tragedies of small investments that could crash the brain, I felt it my duty to make every possible effort to prevent it.
Mr. Whitfield, is it possible that you would have risked such a considerable sum in Faulkner Enterprises had you known they were hopelessly destined to crash?
Certainly not. It was a difficult undertaking, but I felt the crash could have been prevented had Faulkner lived.
He therefore had no reason to commit suicide as far as his business affairs were concerned.
He had every reason for remaining alive.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, what can you tell us about Mr. Faulkner personally?
Well, it is only fair to admit that he had many qualities of which I could not approve of. We were as different as two human beings could be. I believe in one duty to others above all. Bjorn Faulkner believed in nothing but himself.
From your knowledge of him personally, Mr. Whitfield, could you tell us whether you consider it possible that Mr. Bjorn Faulkner committed suicide?
I consider it absolutely impossible.
That is all, Mr. Whitfield.
Mr. Whitfield, were you very fond of your son-in-law?
Yes,
You never disagreed with him, never lost your temper in a quarrel.
Miss Stevens, I don't lose my temper.
Oh. If my memory serves me correctly, it seems that there was some sort of trouble at the time you made that stupendous loan to Mr. Faulkner.
Purely a misunderstanding, I assure you.
Oh.
I must admit that Mr. Faulkner made a somewhat unethical attempt to hasten the loan, which was quite unnecessary since I granted it back for my daughter's sake.
You said your fortune was badly damaged by the Faulkner crash,
Yes,
and your financial situation is rather strained at present.
yes.
Then how can you afford to offer a $25,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of Larry
Your
Rand?
Honor, we object.
John, I'd like to have the privilege of explaining this.
Very well.
I did offer that reward. The gentleman commonly known as Larry Reagan is a notorious criminal specializing in extorting money for so-called protection. He not only menaced Mr. Faulkner, but threatened to kidnap my daughter. I offered that reward for every donation to arrest and conviction possible.
Mr. Whitfield, perhaps you will tell us why you and your daughter left so suddenly, shortly after the night of January 16th.
I think the answer is obvious. My daughter was crushed by the sudden tragedy, and I hastened to take her away to save her health.
You love your daughter profoundly.
Yes,
You have always made it a point that her every wish should be granted.
I can proudly say yes.
When she or you desire anything, you don't stop at the price, do you?
Well, Miss Stevens, you never had
Then would you refuse to buy her the man she wanted?
Miss Stevens!
You didn't care if it took your entire fortune to break the first unbreakable man you'd ever
Your
met.
Honor, we object.
Exception. You hated Bob. You wanted to break him. Mr. Whitfield, perhaps you will tell us that your money had nothing to do with Mr. Faulkner dismissing this Andre, that no ultimatum was delivered.
You are quite wrong in your insinuation. My daughter was under the least trust of Miss Andre.
Oh? I'd be careful of statements like that, Mr. Whitfield, when you remember that your daughter was elevated to the high state of matrimony by purchase.
Your Honor, please.
Who are you? You have me in a circle. You don't think I can trust you at the word. Let's put me in there.
This is exactly what I wanted to prove. Thank you so much.
Your Honor, we
That's all.
move that the defense counsel's outrageous remark which led to this incident be stricken out.
The witness class remark may go out.
The people rest.
Your Honor, the defense moved this case be dismissed for lack of evidence.
Denied.
Exception. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we cannot pass judgment on Karen Andre without first passing it on Bjorn Faulkner. Bjorn Faulkner was a man who set himself outside all human standards. Whether it was above or below them is a question for each of us to decide personally. But I'll ask you to remember this. Bjorn Faulkner was a man who said he needed no reasons for his actions, that he was the reason. This is the man who said that the laws were made for the weak, that the strong were the law. If you'll remember that, you'll understand that the financial condition into which he was thrown in his last days was so intolerable to him that he would resort to any means to escape it, including suicide. And that is what the defense intends to prove. Our first witness is Sid Jordan.
Sid Jordan.
I do.
What is your name?
Sidney Cornelius Jordan. But you can call me Sid.
And what is your occupation?
Secretary for Mr. Bjorn Falk.
How long have you held that job?
Since the beginning of November, since Miss Andre left.
And what was your position before that?
Bookkeeper for Mr. Faulkner.
How long did you hold that job?
5 years.
Did Mr. Faulkner give you Miss Andre's a position when she was dismissed?
Yes?
Did she instruct you in your new duties?
Yes, she did.
What was her behavior like at that time? Did she seem sorry or angry or resentful?
No, not Miss Andre. She was quite calm like always, explained everything clear.
Did you notice any trouble between Miss Andre and Mr. Faulkner at the time?
Miss Laura, there couldn't have been any troubles between Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre as there are between you and your shadow.
Now tell me, did you ever witness any business conferences between Mr. Whitfield and Mr. Faulkner?
I never was present at any conferences, but I've seen Mr. Whitfield leave the office many times. Mr. Whitfield didn't like Mr. Faulkner.
Your Honor, I'd like to present this incident to the courts which I consider to be a hoax. A man has just called me on the telephone and insisted on speaking to me immediately. When told that it was impossible, he gave me this note. It reads, "Don't put Karen Andre on the stand until I get there." Now, Sid,
Right away, Miss Stevens.
One, Miss Andre.
Question me now.
I'm sorry we can't do that. We have to finish questioning Mr. Jordan first.
Well, just hurry, hurry.
What's the hurry? Who are you expecting?
You don't have to answer any
But
of
if
these
you
questions.
Silence! I shall ask the defendant to refrain from any further interruptions.
That ruler should go toward the district attorney.
I said order. Another outbreak of this kind will find the defense counsel in contempt of court. Proceed with the examination, Miss Stevens.
Before this interruption, you were about to tell us why you thought Mr. Whitfield didn't like Mr. Faulkner.
I heard what he said one day. One day, Mr. Whitfield sarcastically asked Mr. Faulkner what he would do if his business would crash. Mr. Faulkner shrugged and then said, "Commit suicide." Mr. Whitfield then looked at him and said, very slowly, "If you do, be sure you make a good job of it."
That's all.
Mr. Jordan, where were you employed before you started with Mr. Faulkner? I worked for a bank in Gainesville. But you were not there immediately preceding your job with Mr. Faulkner? No. Where were you at that time? I was in prison. So you were in jail. On what charge? Embezzlement. From your employer? Yes. You absconded from your bank with $30,000, didn't you? Yes, I did. But Mr. Faulkner helped me to get out of prison. He gave me a chance to go straight. Oh, I see. Mr. Faulkner helped you go straight so that he could help you go crooked. Now, you've been employed for Mr. Faulkner for 5 years, correct? Yes. Did you know all that time he was a swindler? No, I didn't. Do you know now he was a swindler? No, I don't know that. You don't, eh? You didn't know what all those brilliant financial transactions of his were. Well, I knew Mr. Faulkner could do things that other people couldn't do, but I knew they weren't wrong. And how do you know that? Because he was Mr. Bjorn Faulkner. Oh, I see. The king could do no wrong. Mr. Lord, when a man like you or me meet a man like Bjorn Faulkner,
We take our hats off, and we bow, and we take orders. We don't ask questions.
Splendid, my dear Mr. Jordan. Your devotion to your master is worthy of admiration. Now, you would do anything for him, wouldn't you?
Yes,
Were you devoted to Miss Andre also?
Miss Andre is certainly Mr. Faulkner.
Then such a little matter as a few lies for your master's sake would mean nothing to you.
I haven't lied, Mr. Lawyer. Mr. Faulkner is here and can't tell me a lie. If I had a choice, I'd lie for him rather than tell the truth for you.
For which statement I am more grateful than you can imagine. Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Karen Andre.
Karen Andre. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God? That's useless. I'm an atheist.
The witness has to affirm regardless.
I affirm.
What is your name?
Karen Andre.
And what was your last position?
Secretary to Bjorn Faulkner.
Tell us about your first meeting.
I saw him for the first time in his office in Gainesville. He was alone. I had come in answer to his advertisement for a stenographer. It was my first job.
And how did he greet you?
He got up and didn't say a word, just stood looking at me. No one could stand his gaze for very long. I didn't know whether to kneel or slap his face. I didn't do either. I just told him why I had come.
And did he employ you then?
He said I was too young and that he didn't like me. But he threw a stenographer's pad at me and said, "Get down to work, I'm in a hurry." And I did.
And you worked all day?
All day. He dictated as fast, almost faster than he could speak. He didn't give me a chance to say a word. He disliked everything I did. He didn't smile once. And he never took his eyes off me. He acted as if he were cracking a whip over an animal he wanted to break.
What happened when you had finished?
When I finished, I told him I was quitting. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. I put on my things and started out. He tapped his desk once, and I stopped. After a moment, he said, "Tomorrow morning, here, at 9. I left without a word. That night, I couldn't sleep. His eyes were always on me. The next morning, I was in his office at 9.
And you worked and planned and rose to success together.
Yes,
Can you tell us the extent of Faulkner's personal fortune at the height of his success?
he had no personal fortune. He always said that the world belonged to him who could use it. So, he took what he wanted. In business, when he owed one of his companies money, it was crossed off the books and then charged to the accounts of several other concerns. Thus, he balanced his books.
But why did a man of Faulkner's genius resort to such methods?
He wanted to build a gigantic net, a net over the whole world, and he wanted to build it fast, in his lifetime.
When did Faulkner's business difficulties start?
Over a year ago.
Tell us about it.
All his corporations had begun to need money at about the same time. So, he could no longer transfer the charges from one concern to another without throwing the other into bankruptcy, and thus revealing the weakness of our whole financial position.
So what did you do?
A $25 million loan was necessary. We tried to get it from the Whitfield Investment Corporation, but Mr. Whitfield refused. Well, that is, until his daughter came into the picture.
How did that happen?
Bjorn met her at a party. She soon made it obvious that she was greatly interested in him, and he kept up the acquaintance for diplomatic reasons. Then, one day, he came to me, and, well, I'd never seen him pale before. And he said, "Karen, we have one piece of collateral left, and you're holding it. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to let me borrow it for a while." I said, "Certainly, what is it?" He said it was himself. I asked, "For Nancy Whitfield?" And he nodded. I didn't answer at once. It wasn't easy.
don't want me, and I know that. But I have the price. And he asked, what is that price? And she said, a certain $25 million loan you'll need in which to save the lie. I say the lie.
Quiet, please. Anyone disturbing these proceedings will be asked to leave the courtroom.
And what did Mr. Faulkner answer to that?
He said, it's costing you an awful lot of money. And she said, money has never meant anything to me. Then he said, will you always remember it's a business deal? And she said, you'll have your money and I'll have you. Such was the bargain.
And was Mr. Whitfield eager to accept that bargain?
Bjorn said he thought Mr. Whitfield would have a stroke when he heard about it. But Miss Whitfield insisted. She always had her way.
So in other words, Mr. Faulkner had sold himself as his last security.
Yes.
Did you resent that marriage?
No. We had always faced our business as a war. And when any war reaches a crisis, someone has to be sacrificed. The time for my sacrifice had come. But it was harder for him than for me.
Then why did he dismiss you 2 weeks after his wedding?
He had to. Mr. Whitfield refused to advance the money until it was done.
And after you were dismissed, did he grant you the $25,000?
No. Bjorn took it.
How did you take it?
By forging Mr. Whitfield's signature on $25 million worth of security.
How do you know that?
I helped him do it.
And did this $25 million help Mr. Faulkner?
Only temporarily. Bjorn had stretched his credit to the utmost. There was no more to be had.
And how did he take the situation?
He knew it was the end.
What were his plans?
You don't find men like Bjorn Faulkner cringing before a bankruptcy petition. And you don't find them locked in jail either.
And the alternative?
He had come into this world as its master, and he would leave when and how.
Stop! I told you to wait for me!
Larry, what did you say?
What is the meaning of this?
Karen, you don't understand!
Your Honor, I demand to see you.
Why not, Miss Andre?
That's the man I see. Kiss her, the sinner.
Your Honor, this man loves you. Don't believe anything you say. He's your wife. Don't believe a word he says.
Karen, your sacrifice is useless.
What do you mean?
Faulkner is dead.
Dead?
Wait a minute, you're on trial for his murder and you didn't even know he was dead?
No, she didn't know it. She was arrested for Faulkner's murder. He was still alive.
But he is alive.
No, Karen. Board attention. Hearing court number 11, State of Georgia. The Honorable Judge Margaret Heath presiding.
The people of the state of Georgia versus Karen Andre.
Then, Your Honor?
If Your Honor please, I would like to report that I have issued a warrant for the arrest of Florence Reagan. he is obviously an accomplice in this murder. But he has disappeared. He was last seen with the defense counsel, and I would like to...
Who's disappeared? Keep your shirt on. What do you suppose I appeared for? Just to give you guys a thrill? You don't have to issue any warrants. I'll stay here. If she's guilty, I'm guilty.
The defense may proceed.
Karen Andre.
Karen Andre.
When court adjourned yesterday, were you fully aware of the truth about this case?
No.
Due to certain circumstances which have arisen, do you wish to retract any of your testimony?
No.
When you took a stand earlier, did you come intending to shield anyone?
Yes.
Who?
Bjorn Faulkner.
Do you still find it necessary to protect him?
No. It's not necessary anymore.
Do you still claim that Bjorn Faulkner committed suicide?
No. Bjorn Faulkner did not commit suicide. He was murdered. But I didn't do it. Please believe me. Not for my sake. I don't care what you do to me now, but because you cannot let his murderer remain unpunished. I'll tell you everything. I lied at the inquest. I lied to my own attorney. I was going to lie here today, but everything I've said so far has been true. Now, I'll tell you the rest.
When court adjourned earlier, you were about to tell us Mr. Faulkner's way out of his difficulties.
I said he was going to leave this world when and how he pleased. But I didn't mean he was going to kill himself. I did push a body off the penthouse, but that body was dead before I touched it. It was not Bjorn Faulkner.
Please explain that to us, Miss Andre.
Bjorn wanted to be reported as dead, but he didn't want any searches or investigations afterwards. So, he decided to stage a fake suicide and disappear. I was to go with him. He had the plan in mind for a long time. He kept $10 million for the Whitfield loan for the purpose. But we needed someone to help us. Someone who could not be connected with Bjorn in any way. There was only one such person we knew, Larry Reagan.
And why made you think that Mr. Reagan would help you in such a dangerous undertaking?
He loved me.
And he agreed to help you in spite of that?
He agreed because of that.
What was the plan, Miss Andre?
Reagan wants to get a body. On the night of January 16th, Lefty O'Toole, a gunman, was shot by rival gangsters. Reagan stole his body. His height, hair, and measurements were the same as Bjorn's. He was the man I pushed off the penthouse.
Was that the extent of Mr. Reagan's help?
No. Reagan used to be an air pilot, and he was to get a plane and fly Bjorn to South America. That day, January 16th, Bjorn transferred the $10 million to 3 banks in Buenos Aires under the assumed name of Ragnar Peters. A month later, I was to join him at the Hotel Continental in Buenos Aires. Until then, the 3 of us were not to communicate at all. No matter what happened, we were not to reveal the secret.
Tell us what happened on January 16th.
Bjorn came to my house that night. I'll never forget his smile as he stepped off the elevator. He loved danger. We had dinner together, and then we went to Reagan's place. Reagan had O'Toole's body dressed in traveling clothes Bjorn wanted to be seen entering the building, so I didn't use my key. I rang the bell. We were dressed formally, to make it look like a dinner party. Bjorn and Reagan supported the body as if it were a drunken friend. The wife of the night janitor opened the door, and we went up in the elevator.
And then what happened?
Bjorn exchanged clothes with the corpse. He wrote the letter and propped it up on the center table where anyone could find it. The three of us had a drink, and they carried the body out and left it leaning against the parapet. Then we said goodbye. Bjorn was to go first. He went down in the elevator. I watched the needle on the indicator moving, and then it stopped. He was gone. And then Reagan followed a few minutes later. They were to meet 10 miles out of the city where Reagan had left his plane. I sat alone for an hour. The penthouse was silent. I didn't want to wait out in the garden with the body. So I laid on the bed in my room. The clock beside the bed, and it ticked in the darkness. When an hour had passed, I knew that the plane had taken off, that Bjorn and Reagan were on their way to South America. So I got up and tore my dress to make it look like a struggle, and went out into the garden. I looked down. The world seemed so far away. I got my gun and fired one shot into the air to explain the bullet wounds in O'Toole's body in case it were discovered. I must have been nervous. I forgot all about the fingerprints. Then I dropped the gun and pushed the body over. I thought that all of Bjorn's troubles went with it. I didn't know that his life went too. That is all.
Miss Andre, you said you lied at the inquest,
Yes,
and you lied to your attorney.
yes.
And the story you've come to court prepared to tell is totally different from the story you've just told us.
It is.
Then why should we believe a word of it? How would we know when you were lying when you were telling us the
We
truth?
object, Your Honor.
Miss Andre, did Mr. Faulkner have a clear conception of the difference between right and wrong?
Mr. Faulkner never thought of things as right or wrong. To him, it was only you can or you can't, and he always could.
And yourself? You didn't object to helping him in all his swindling activities?
To me, it was only he wants or he doesn't.
You loved Joe involved him?
Yes,
Such as he was?
because he was such as he was.
Exactly, Miss Andre. Now, what would you do if some woman were to come along and take the ruthless brute you love and change him into her own ideal of an upright man? Would you still love him?
Your Honor, we object.
But I want the answer. I want the district attorney to know that he is insulting Bjorn Faulkner's memory.
You do. And you thought nothing of insulting him while he was alive by dividing your love with a gangster.
Well, you loved him for a while.
You're mistaken, Mr. Flint. Reagan loved me. I did not love him.
He didn't demand your love for his help.
No, he demanded nothing.
He didn't help you take revenge on your first lover.
No.
Why so particular, Miss Andre? Is there much difference between a swindler and a gangster?
We object.
Miss Andre, you said you were the only one with full knowledge of Faulkner's swindling activity. That you could put him in jail at any time.
Yes. I would never, ever do anything like that.
But you could if you wanted to.
I suppose so.
Well, then doesn't that explain his visits to you after his marriage? He had reformed. He wanted to avoid a crash, but you held it over his head. You could expose him and ruin him at any time, and before he made good for his crime. Which was it that held him in your arms? Love or fear?
Bjorn never knew the meaning of the word fear.
Miss Andre, who knew about the transfer of the $10 million to South America?
Bjorn, myself, and Reagan.
Not just yourself and Reagan alone. With your knowledge of his swindling activities and your ability to forge his name, could you and Reagan not alone swindle that money?
That would not have been necessary. Bjorn would have given me the money had I asked for it.
Mr. Faulkner kept you in extravagant luxury.
Yes.
You hated to change your mode of living, to see him turn his money over to his investors, to see him poor.
No one was ever to see him poor.
No, of course not, because you and your gangster lover were going to murder him and then swindle the 10 million to South America, which no one else knew about.
Your Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
Miss Andre, you've heard it testified that Mr. Bjorn Faulkner had no reason to commit suicide as far as his business affairs were concerned. And his marriage to Miss Whitfield had brought him the first happiness he'd ever known. You hated him for that happiness, didn't you?
You don't understand Bjorn Faulkner.
Maybe I don't understand you. But let's see if I understand you. You formed a partnership with a swindler the first day you met him. With him, you defrauded thousands of investors the world over. You cultivated a relationship with a notorious gangster. You were involved in a $25 million forgery. This you told us proudly here on the witness stand, flaunting your defiance at all sense of honesty. You expect us to believe that you are not capable of murder?
You're wrong, Mr. Flint. I am capable of murder for Bjorn Faulkner's sake.
No further questions.
Lawrence Reagan.
Lawrence Reagan. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Lawrence Reagan.
What is your occupation?
Unemployed.
How long have you known Gerald Andre?
5 months.
Where did you first meet her?
In Faulkner's office. I went to do some business with him. I gave up the business when I met his secretary.
When did you happen to become friendly with Miss Andre?
Well, our first meeting wasn't exactly friendly. She wouldn't let me in to see Mr. Faulkner. She said I had enough money to buy orchids by the pound and that I had no business with her boss. I said I'd think it over and went. I thought it over, but I didn't think of the business. I thought only of her. The next day I sent her a pound of orchids. That's how it started.
But didn't you know that Miss Andre loved Mr. Faulkner?
What of it? I knew it was hopeless for me, but I couldn't help it.
You never expected her to share your love in return?
No.
You never tried to force your love upon her?
You have to know all that.
I'm afraid you do.
I kissed her once, by force. It was the night of Faulkner's wedding. She was so alone and so unhappy. I didn't want her to know that well, she knew. She said it was no use, and we've never mentioned it since.
When did Miss Andre first tell you of Faulkner's plans to escape to South America?
About 2 weeks before we pulled.
Was Lefty O'Toole one of your men?
No.
Were you in any way connected in his murder?
No, I'm sorry.
You had no definite knowledge of his planned murder.
Well, you could just say I had a way of guessing.
Tell us what happened on January 16th.
It was all worked out as Miss Andre has told you. But she only knows half the story. I know the rest.
Tell us what happened after you left the penthouse.
I left 10 minutes after Faulkner, and he had taken my car to cover up his identity. I had one of my men leave another car for me at the door and stepped on it full speed.
Where did you go?
To Meadow Lane, 10 miles out in Cobb County. I left my plane there earlier in the evening. I was to meet Faulkner there, and we were leaving lunch for South America.
What time did you get there?
About midnight. It was a bright moon, I remember. I pulled up the road, and I saw tracks in the mud where Faulkner's car had passed. Then I pulled to the lane. Then I thought I'd lose my mind. The plane was gone.
What did you do?
I searched for that plane for 2 hours. Faulkner's car was there. We had agreed to hide it. The lights were off. The keys were in the switch. I saw tracks on the ground where the plane had taken off. But Faulkner wasn't a pilot. He couldn't fly that plane himself.
Were there any clues to this mystery?
Yes, one. A car I found hidden in the brush.
What kind of car?
A big black sedan.
And then what did you do?
I wanted to know whose car it was, so I called the back seat and settled down to wait.
How long did you have to wait?
The rest of that night.
And then?
The owner came back. I saw him coming. His face looked strange. He had no hat, and his clothes were wrinkled and grease spots.
And then what happened?
I pretended I was asleep in the back seat. He approached the car and I watched him. He opened the door, then he saw me. He gave a start and he hit me with his truck.
And what did you do?
I awakened, stretched, and rubbed my eyes and said, "Oh, it's you." He said, "Who are you?" I said, "My name is Larry Reagan. You may have heard it. I was in a bit of trouble and finding this car here was quite inconvenient." He said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's too bad. You have to get out. I'm in a hurry."
Did you get out?
"Oh, no." I stretched again and said, "What's the hurry?" He said, "That is none of your business." I smiled and told him I would like to know the whole story.
And what did he say?
At first he said nothing. He took out a checkbook and looked at me, and I shrugged and looked at him. He says, "Will $5,000 be enough?" I said, "It'll do." He wrote out a check for Lawrence Reagan.
What is all this nonsense? Who was the man?
Who's the man, Mr. Reagan?
The clerk may read that check to you.
Finally, read this check.
Paid to the order of Lawrence Reagan, the sum of $5,000. Signed, John Graham Whitfield.
What's an outrage? I didn't see that check.
I offer this check in evidence.
Objection!
Objection overruled, submitted in evidence.
What did you do after you received this check, Mr. Reagan?
I drew my gun and stuck it in his wrist and said, "Now you louser, what have you done with Paul?"
Your Honor! This man allowed to think the same as Mr. D. Dr. Whitfield!
The witness is allowed to testify. If it is proved to be perjury, he will suffer the consequences.
And what did he answer?
At first he muttered, "I don't know what you're talking about." I jammed my gun harder and said, "What are you taking?"
And did you get any information out of it?
Not a word. He talked and I threatened. It was no use, so I let him go. I knew I could always get him. I didn't want to kill him. Yet.
And then did you try and find Paul?
I didn't lose a second. I rushed home, jumped into some flying clothes, grabbed another plane, and headed straight for Buenos Aires. I advertised in the papers, but I got no answer. Nobody called the banks for the 10 million that we had left under the name Ragnar Heaton.
Did you try and communicate about any of this to Miss Andre?
No, we had promised to stay away from each other for a month. And she had been arrested for Faulkner's murder. I laughed when I read that. But I still couldn't say a word, not to betray Faulkner, if he were still alive. I waited.
What were you waiting for?
For the month to pass, February 16th. I went to the Hotel Continental in Buenos Aires. I set my teeth and waited. I must have waited every minute of every hour of that last day. He didn't come.
And then?
And then I knew he was dead. I came back to Georgia and started to search for my plane. We found it yesterday.
Where did you find it?
In an abandoned airfield in Peninsula, 20 miles from Meadow Lane. I recognized the plane by the engine number. The plane had been landed in Car 7.
Was the plane empty?
No, I found the body of a man in it.
Did you identify him?
No one could. It was nothing but a burned skeleton. But the height was the same. It was Faulkner. I examined the body, or what was left of it, and I found 2 bullet wounds on the bones. One in the right hand and one over the heart. He must have been disarmed first, shot through the heart, and then murdered defenselessly.
That is all.
Just what is your business, Mr. Reagan?
I refused that information to others. It would seem so partial if I told only you.
Mr. Reagan, what do you do when prospective clients refuse to pay your protection?
I'm legally allowed not to understand what you're talking about.
Then I will make it clear. Can I question you as to whether you read the newspaper?
You may.
Well,
Question.
do you read the newspapers, Mr. Reagan?
Occasionally.
Did you read that when Mr. James Sutton Vance Jr. refused to pay protection to a certain gangster, his luxurious home was destroyed just after the guests had left from a party, barely missing a wholesale slaughter? Now, do we call this a coincidence, Mr. Reagan?
An amazing coincidence, Mr. Flint, just after the guest left.
Did you read also that when Mr. Robert Van Dorn refused...
Your Honor, we object. Such questions are absolutely irrelevant.
Sustained.
So you had no ill feeling toward Mr. Faulkner for the failure of your business with him?
No.
Mr. Lawrence Reagan, what would you do if someone were to come along, take this woman you love so profoundly, and throw her aside merely because he had found someone else with more money?
I'd cut his throat with a dull saw.
You would.
I would.
And yet you expect us to believe that you, Lawrence Reagan, outlaw, gangster, scum of the underworld, would step aside with a grand gesture and again throw this woman back in the arms of the same man?
Your Honor, we...
I loved her. You did. Then why did you allow the relationship to continue between she and Faulkner after his marriage?
Just a rare privilege.
You two didn't hold a blackmail plot over his head? Got any proof of that? Association with the best proof.
Objection!
Sustained.
Mr. Reagan, how did you kill Faulkner in the penthouse?
Objection!
Sustained.
You deny you having any part in this murder.
I do.
You deny you were an accomplice to that.
I do.
But you admit to knowledge of the fantastic plot which Miss Andre has just described.
I
To
do.
what extent did you participate?
I merely provided the course.
And nothing else?
Nothing else.
Exhibit B. Do you recognize this gun, Mr. Reagan?
No.
And perhaps I should refresh your memory. This is the gun found in the penthouse on the night of January 16th. The gun which Miss Andre claims was hers and she fired it in the air. Now, do you recognize it?
No.
I have here an affidavit which states that this gun, serial number CC3490, was sold to Mr. Lawrence Reagan.
Mr. Flint, I would like to see that affidavit.
There is no CC3490 on this gun, Mr. District Attorney.
No. Have you heard of the heat test, Mr. Reagan?
No.
The serial number on this gun has been filed off, but when heated red hot, it still discloses the serial number CC3490.
This affidavit is satisfactory, Mr. Flint.
Submitted as evidence.
Accepted. Exhibit F.
Now, Mr. Reagan, you claim to being alone with Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre in the penthouse that night? Then you will kindly give us the whereabouts of the other accomplice that was with you, the one who played the drunk.
Lefty O'Toole. I can give you his exact address. Evergreen Cemetery, Whitfield Family Memorial, which is the swankiest place poor Lefty has ever been.
Now, Mr. Reagan, you claim that the body burned in the plane in Kennesaw Airfield is Mr. Bjorn Faulkner.
Yes.
And that the body and that the body buried in the cemetery at Evergreen Cemetery is Mr. Lefty O'Toole.
Yes.
What is to prove that this is the other way around? Supposing you did steal O'Toole's body, what is to prove that you didn't plant O'Toole's body in the plane in Kennesaw Airfield and set fire to it yourself, then come here with this ridiculous story today in order to save Miss Andre? You've heard her testify for us that you'd do anything for her, that you'd lie for her, murder for
Your
her.
Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
Where's your real proof, Mr. Reagan?
Mr. Flint, you're a district attorney, and well, you know what I am. Let's just say we both have a lot of dirty work to do. Such happens to be life, or most of it. But do you think that we are both so low that if something passes us, which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof.
No further questions.
Your Honor, the defense rests. Any witnesses in rebuttal?
Your Honor, the prosecution has one. Mrs. Roberta Van Rensselaer.
Roberta Van Rensselaer. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? Certainly. Why not?
Your name?
Real, or professional?
Both, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. My real name is Ruby O'Toole. But if we should ever get friendly, don't call me Ruby. I hate that name.
But professionally known as Roberta Van Rensselaer.
That's my nom de plume. I'm a third historian.
You mean you dance?
That's the common name for it.
Where were you last employed?
At the club Shades O'Toole. No,
And who is your employer?
the owner,
Mr. O'Toole?
No, I was his wife.
Do you know Mr. Lawrence Reagan?
I've met the rat.
I take it you haven't much affection for Mr. Reagan.
We were cast off together on a lonely island. It would still be lonely.
And why do you dislike him?
Because he killed Leslie O'Toole.
Your Honor, we object.
Strike it out. You must forego your personal opinions and confine yourself to the facts of your personal knowledge. Now, when did you see Mr. Reagan last? Oh, excuse me. Let me ask this one. Did Reagan do business with Mr. O'Toole?
No. If Lefty had stooped that low, he would have broken his back.
Then would you say they were rivals?
Larry might say so. But Lefty only considered him an amusement like golf or fishing.
And when did you see him last?
See him or hear from him?
See him.
About a month before Lefty was rubbed out, Reagan came over to the club one night to see Lefty. Lefty had me sit in. He always did that because Larry was trying to muscle in.
What did Mr. Reagan want that night?
He said he wanted to sell out.
Did that surprise you?
You could have carried me out in a spoon.
Was O'Toole interested in the proposition?
No. He said Larry didn't sit long enough in one place to get a shine on his pants.
Why did Mr. Reagan want to sell out?
His story was he was leaving the country for good. He described a woman he had on the run and a lot of important money she was going to have. He said they were going to go to South America to secret between them and the income tax boys.
Did he ever mention who the woman was?
No, but Lefty knew. He said it was some woman working in Faulkner's office. But that didn't matter because Faulkner wouldn't stop him.
And what did Mr. Reagan say to that?
He said Faulkner was going away for good. And Lefty said, you planning to erase him? And Larry says, no. He's going to commit a fake suicide. And won't he be surprised when he finds out it's real?
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay and not admissible.
Overruled.
Exception.
Do you recall the rest of the conversation?
Yes. They talked about a price for his interest. And Lefty said he would think it over.
And when did you hear from Mr. Reagan again?
On the night of January 16th, he phoned the house and asked for Lefty. And after they talked for a while, Lefty said he was willing to go out to Sandy Springs to settle the deal.
And Lefty left the house to meet Reagan?
Yes, he went to Buckhead and he was put on the spot on the Chattahoochee Bridge.
And he was killed that same night?
Yes, and an hour after, his body disappeared.
You're a witness.
You are the widow of George O'Toole,
Yes,
and you admit that you hate Lawrence Reagan.
I swear to it.
How did you allow that to affect your testimony?
How do you mean?
I mean, you are here to get revenge. You relate things you know nothing about. For instance, you said that Larry Reagan was losing money. How could you possibly know that?
We kept better books for Reagan than he kept for the government.
You said your husband met his death on the night of January 16th.
Yes,
And you believe he was put on the spot by rival gangsters.
the man who did it was...
Please confine your answers to the questions put before you. You believe he was killed by a rival,
It couldn't possibly...
but you didn't consider Reagan to be a rival. Isn't that what you said?
You don't have to consider a scum your rival trying to keep off your farm.
That is all.
Killing Leslie O'Toole.
That is all, Miss Van Rensselaer.
It was dirty, Judge.
Any more witnesses? Your Honor, the defense would like to recall John Graham Whitfield.
John Graham Whitfield.
Do you have any objection if I ask for a court order to examine the body in Evergreen Cemetery?
I have no objection, Miss Stevens, but the body has been cremated.
Cremated? Oh, why was that done, Mr. Whitfield?
The body was in such a condition, we thought it was the best thing to do.
And that is the only reason?
It's been a custom in our family for years.
Mr. Whitfield, where were you on the night of January 16th?
At home,
Have you any witnesses to that?
Miss Stevens, You must realize I'm not in the habit of providing myself with alibis. I've never had any reason to keep track of my activity and provide witnesses for it. But if you insist, I believe I spoke to my
How many
daughter.
cars do you own, Mr. Whitfield?
4.
What are they?
One of them is a black sedan, which you are evidently anxious to learn. May I remind you, it is not the only black sedan in Atlanta.
You've just returned my plane from California.
Yes,
You flew it yourself.
yes,
You're a licensed pilot.
I am.
And yet this story of Mr. Reagan's about you stealing his plane and burning it in a Kennesaw airfield is nothing but a lie in your opinion.
It is.
Then who wrote this check for $5,000?
I do.
You admit it?
I do.
Explain yourself.
We all know Larry Reagan's profession. He has threatened my daughter. I prefer to buy him off and take a chance on the life of my child. So on January 6th, I wrote a check for $5,000.
But this check is dated January 16th.
Yes, Reagan is under the one and made it 16.
You mean he changed the date?
You may call a handwriting expert and find out.
Kindly refrain from advising. Your daughter and your fortune are your most prized possessions, aren't they?
They are.
Then what would you do to the man who stole your fortune and then deserted your daughter for another woman?
Your Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
Exception, you hated Father. You wanted to break him. You suspected his intentions of staging this suicide. The words Mr. Jordan heard you say proved it.
I suspected nothing.
And on January 16th, didn't you spend the day following Father?
Certainly not.
Didn't you follow him that night when he left the penthouse?
No.
You heard nothing unusual about his activities at the time?
None.
You heard nothing unusual that day?
Not a thing.
You had no knowledge of the transfer to Buenos Aires?
I never heard of it.
Stop! I killed him. I killed George Faulkner. I have that man to kill him. The whole truth, so help me God. I didn't know, but I see it now. He killed Faulkner because he lied. He knew about the $10 million because I told him.
Now look here, my man. You
That's
can't
all,
possibly.
Whitfield.
No questions.
Kindly take a stand, Mr. Jordan. You told Whitfield about the transfer?
He asked many times about $10 million and where it was spent. I didn't know it was a secret. That day, I told him about Buenos Aires. That day, that due January 16th.
What kind of a frame-up is this?
You told Whitfield about the transfer at noon?
Yes, I did. God help me. I'd give my life for George Faulkner, and I don't think kill him.
That's all.
Mr. Jordan, you were alone with Mr. Whitfield when you told him?
Yes.
Then it is the word of an ex-convict versus the word of John Graham Whitfield.
Yeah, but
That is all, Mr. Jordan.
The bailiff will now escort Mr. Jordan out of the courtroom. The defense may proceed with closing arguments.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in a few moments you will be called upon to decide the fate of a woman. Her life rests in your hands, and I'm here to plead for that life. Here before you, Karen Andre has confessed to many things which may arouse you against her, but she is not on trial for those things. She is only being tried for the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. And to hold her guilty of that murder, you must convince yourself of two things. That the evidence suggests that she did it, and that she had a motive. Now, what evidence has been put before you? Merely that Karen Andre pushed the body off the door. We admit that. But we deny that that was the body of Bjorn Faulkner. Now, what about the motive? In business, the lives of Karen Andre and Bjorn Faulkner were one. Think of Bjorn Faulkner. The stake pretends that he had reformed his marriage, become a devoted husband, and dedicated his life to saving his unfortunate investors. But do you think he was the kind of man to renounce his whole life and repent? If you do, she's guilty. Have you listened to the testimony? After his marriage, he didn't take his wife into his confidence and failed to explain his absence from her night after night. Is that the act of a devoted husband? And on January 16th, he absconded with $10 million. Is that the act of a man trying to save his investors? And when he realized he could no longer hold off the collapse of his empire, he decided to stage a fake suicide. And to whom did he confide his plans? To his wife? No, to Karen Andre. Who was to meet him in South America? His wife? No, Karen Andre. There was every possible advantage to Karen Andre had Faulkner lived. She had no motive for killing him. Remember this. Karen Andre loved Bjorn Faulkner. That is her only defense. Is it in you to understand Karen Andre? Is it in you to understand the man she loved? Who is on trial in this case? Karen Andre? No. It is you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who are on trial. It is your souls and your minds and the very deepest secret chords of your heart which will be brought to light when your decision is rendered. And I ask you for a verdict of not guilty.
Mr. Attorney, we now conclude this case.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of this jury, I have no reason to appeal to your sympathies, to your souls, or to those deep, secret chords of your heart, but to your reason alone. For the only things that concern you in this case are the facts. As I enumerate them to you, bear in mind, these are not manufactured alibis, but facts. On the night of January 16th, Bjorn Faulkner was killed. He was murdered. His body was thrown from the parapet outside his penthouse by this woman, Karen Andre, and a detective from a nearby room was an eyewitness to it. That is a fact. He was already dead. He had been shot in that penthouse, and the recently discharged gun was found later by the police. Now, the defense claims that he fired the gun himself in an attempted suicide, but when examined for fingerprints, this gun bore only the fingerprints of Karen Andre and no one else. And that is a fact. That gun belonged to Lawrence Reagan, who had been with Miss Andre and Mr. Faulkner in the penthouse that night, although Miss Andre claims she had never seen him before. But according to the testimony of our housekeeper, he was her lover, and with him she conspired to ship $10 million to South America. Now, where did they get such a sum? By forging the name of John Graham Whitfield. This Miss Andre told us proudly here on the witness stand. Now, why did they do all this? A child could give you the answer. Miss Andre hated Mr. Faulkner because he had dismissed her from his office after marrying the other woman. She was determined to accomplish two things. First, avenge herself on her first lover, and then seize for herself the money of $10 million, the amount of $10 million, thus ensuring for herself the depraved luxury to which she had become accustomed. All of this she planned to do with her new lover, Lawrence Reagan. And so between them, they concocted this diabolically clever alibi, this confusion of corpses, this cock and bull story, the sheer impudence of which almost brought it to success. On January 16th, Lefty O'Toole was lured from his home in answer to a phone call from Lawrence Reagan, and his body later found dead. January 16th, the $10 million was transferred to South America. On January 16th, Bjorn Faulkner was shot in his penthouse, and his body hurled to the sidewalks so as to both conceal the bullet wound and make identification difficult. And on January 16th, Lefty O'Toole's body was taken by airplane to Kennesaw Airfield, and he and the plane set fire to it. And then finally, on January 16th, a check was taken from Mr. John Graham Whitfield, and the date changed in a ridiculous attempt to implicate him in this crime. These are the facts in the case. A case so strong, I can only conceive of one verdict which I ask you to return: murder in the first degree.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the bailiff will now escort you to the jury room. I shall ask you to consider your verdict carefully, omitting all personal prejudices and symptoms. I shall ask you to bear in mind the gun, fingerprints on it, the admitted forgeries, and the motives which may have caused this crime to be committed. You are to determine only whether Karen Andre is guilty or not guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. You may bring in a verdict of acquittal or of murder, first degree.
I couldn't see his face. Countless hat was all drooping over his eyes and his coat collar turned up.
It was a difficult undertaking, but I felt the crash could have been prevented had Faulkner lived.
I found only two valuable things in this earth: my whip over the world and Karen Andre.
A certain peculiarity in the handwriting led me to the conclusion that this letter was forged. No light. Karen Andre's white gown shimmering in the moonlight. A man in evening clothes, Faulkner, leaning against the parapet. She pushes him with all her strength, and he goes over the parapet, down into space.
It was impossible to determine it could have been the wound or the fall.
But he realized his past mistakes. He was ready to atone for them when I came into his life.
I didn't know, but I see it now. He killed Bobby because he lied. He knew about the $10 million because I told him.
And she asked me to put it on her. I thought that she could stand it. And it burned her shady skin. She laughed like bacon. She even said was mad, kissing her bars like a study girl.
He left the house to meet Reagan, and he was from spot on the Chattahoochee Bridge.
Do you think we are both so low? If something passes us, which one kneels? We no longer have eyes to see it. I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof.
You're wrong, Mr. Flint. I am capable of murder for Bjorn Faulkner's sake.
All right. Prisoner will rise and face the jury. The jury will rise and face the prisoner. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict? What say you? The prisoner will rise and face the court.
It is my duty to set a date for sentence. In order to give the prisoner ample time, she will be brought before me on the 30th day of this month.
Your Honor, I asked for the court for an order of appeal.
And you have excellent grounds. The court sees no reason to thank this jury for a verdict which, in my opinion, is contrary to the evidence. I shall order the names of these jurors stricken from the jury rolls for 5 years. This court now stands adjourned.
Please.
Please go up here. Come on.
This is Mr. Parker's debut at directing.
We'd just like to thank y'all for all you've done for us. And we feel like that we could have never had this show.